Thanks, everyone. Yeah, great to be here. Hello online. Hope you're all having a good conference, day 2. So today we're going to go into the basics of making an accessible Juce app. If you're here today, I'm going to assume you're either a beginner to Juce, or maybe you're not a beginner, but maybe you're new to parts of Juce which deal with accessibility, or you're knowledgeable about both, and you just want to hear some perspectives from someone like me who works at a company like Focusrite on how we approach making accessible software. Or you're a colleague of mine, in which case you're there. In any case, you're all welcome here, so I hope you get something valuable out of this. The goal today is to share small, specific examples that you can take and build from and consider when making a Juce app. So we're not going to be able to cover everything, and there's also plenty of ways to achieve something. So yeah, let's go. So just to begin with, on the screen now, there's a QR code. If you want to follow along, there's a repository that I'm going to be referring to. The slides that are on screen, they're in the docs folder, so you can access them now or whenever. If you missed that, it's just on the Focusrite group organization. You'll see it. It's called Accessible Juce App, ADC. We're going to focus mainly on stock Juce components and the traditional Juicy way, Super C++ way of GUI app development. Though I'll maybe chat about other options towards the end, because there are other options. So today I'm going to use the word accessible, mainly just to refer to screen reader accessibility, which will be, the focus today, since there are relatively new parts of Juce, I mean, it's sort of 2 years old now, that deal with accessibility since it was added in Juce 6.1. Not meaning to lessen the importance of localization, visual customization, text options, etc. Screen reader stuff. I also use macOS primarily, so it's going to be kind of Mac-centric, but the concepts apply to Windows as well. So agenda for today, we're going to dive right in with a demo of a basic app that has default Juce accessibility, and we're going to assess it, identify problems. I'm going to go into some tips for testing accessibility, and then we're going to go ahead and improve the app. We're going to make it better together. If we've got time, heads up, I don't think we will, I can tour a demo of an accessible app that we've got out now, which is Focusrite Control 2 for controlling 4th gen Scarletts. If we run out of time, I'll also be around at lunchtime in our booth, and I might set up VoiceOver and a 4th gen Scarlett so you can have a play yourself. And also, time for Q&A. A little bit about me. I'm a software developer, been here 4 years, working on audio interface control software, 3rd gens, Vocaster, 4th gen. And I'm a musician as well, and I love accessible software. So, digital mess. Cool, so demo time, let's go. So I've built a small demo app designed to be simple yet representative of a somewhat audio-related app. It's just going to be a bunch of buttons and faders, etc. But hopefully it's better than a load of sort of out-of-context examples. So you can follow along. There's going to be marked stages of commits throughout the repo that sort of track our progress. And you can check it out just by using the command here. So we're going to start with the initial commit. So let me see. We're going to try doing some live building. I've got backup plans, but I just like the idea of trying to build it live. If the gods of my CPM source cache are with us today, then we'll all be good. I think we're good. Okay, so I'm going to try turning on VoiceOver. We'll just check the level.
VoiceOver on, speech off.
Great, that's pretty good level. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're not going to use the mouse. We're just going to try using the keyboard to interact with our app. So I'm going to use Command Tab to get to it. Okay, so on screen now, there's a sort of, looks like a bunch of channel strips. You can kind of get from the visual context what things are about, but Yeah, let me make VoiceOver start speaking.
Speech unmuted.
Okay, cool. So there's a couple of ways that we can interact with our screen reader. Usually tab moves keyboard focus along. That's quite common on Mac, more so on Windows, but there's also other ways where you can use the screen reader directly to move around. I'll kind of refer to both. The tabbing we're going to get to right now, but then there's also what's called the screen reader key and then the arrow keys. So on VoiceOver, that's the VO key, which is, depending on how you've got it set up, caps lock or control option. But let's just try pressing tab. Okay, so nothing there. So that's a bit of a blocker because we don't really know where to begin. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's on screen. Luckily, let's try a different approach. So I'm going to use VO, the caps lock key, and then the arrows, and see what we find.
Off. 48V button.
Okay, 48V, phantom power. That's okay. I can see. Right, that's going to turn on phantom power.
0 dB. Vertical slider.
dB. Okay, so that's a level of some kind or a gain, but there's no label there, so we don't know what it is. By the way, this is just sort of default accessibility, so I haven't put any effort into it. I've just put these components on the screen, laid them out. Yeah, so I'm going to go VO right again.
Off. 48V button.
Okay, so 48V again. That's kind of confusing because we just had a 48V button. You can get from the visual context that there's grouping, right? Because there's rectangles around these groups of controls that look like channel strips, but that's not indicated in the screen reader hierarchy. So that's a bit of a problem.
0 dB. Off. 0 dB. Vertical slider. Off. 48V
And there's
button.
4 lots of that,
0
which
dB.
makes it even
Vertical
more
slider.
confusing.
C. Vertical slider.
Okay, no label there.
0 dB. Vertical slider.
That's the same as
C. 0 off. 0
that.
dB. Vertical C. Zip off. M button. Off. S button.
Marks, Spencer, I'm not sure.
Off.
Obviously, you can get from the context, right? It's Mutant solo button, and give this app would be called something like super cool channel strip app. You can probably infer the Mutant solo, but it's not explicit, so we probably need to change that. Okay, quite a few issues there. I'll just turn this off.
VoiceOver off.
I'll talk briefly about tools for testing accessibility. So there is the Accessibility Inspector on Mac, and on Windows there is also the Accessibility in Sites, conveniently named, kind of similar. And these are good for testing the sort of the hierarchy of the application and seeing what components report what information, so like titles and stuff. So you can see if we hover around the mouse, we're like, oh, well, that's accessible, right? There's lots of different stuff, things are there. But we will see why that's not necessarily the best way to verify the accessibility. But these are good debugging tools. You can see the sort of the type says slider, it's got the current value. There's ways to sort of interact with the components. So yeah, let me turn this off. Let's go back to the slides. So yeah, just mention Accessibility Inspector comes with Xcode. So if you install Xcode, you get the developer tools with that. So it's bundled as part of that. And then for Windows, you can download Accessibility Insights for free. And yeah. However, as I said, it's not necessarily the best way to verify the accessibility. You need to use a screen reader for a more representative experience. If you don't rely on a screen reader for your day-to-day computing, then of course, if you're developing a product, then you should also gather and act on feedback from folks who may have more experience than you and gather feedback, improve the product. But what the context I'm coming from today is more, if you don't use a screen reader and you're a developer, what sort of workflow should you adopt? And it's something that I've kind of picked up and our team have picked up in terms of testing out with a screen reader. So these are the main ones: VoiceOver, Narrator Jaws, NVDA. There are some various surveys, such as the WebAIM one, which seek to quantify screen reader usage. Quite interesting. But these are the main ones that people are going to expect to be able to use them. They are all popular. There are some quirks with how some of the Windows ones interact with Juce. I'm not going to go into that today, but they mostly work the same. A couple of other tips for streamlining your experience. So you can do a tutorial for how to use the screen reader. There's often one built into the screen reader itself. Like there's a voiceover, I can't remember what it's called now, but there's a voiceover tutorial that comes with it. Learn the shortcuts so you can quickly toggle things on and off. Command F5 to toggle voiceover.
Voiceover on arc.
Okay.
Presenter. Voiceover off.
So you can quickly turn things on and off whilst you're developing your app. Also, quick ways for making it be quiet, right? So you might be on a Zoom call with another developer, and you're trying to debug the screen reader accessibility. It can be quite challenging sometimes when you've got the screen reader talking at you whilst you're trying to talk about how you're going about making things accessible. So if you don't want to keep toggling the screen reader on and off, there are a few things you can set up. So first of all, the control key will just instantly stop voiceover in its tracks. So
Voiceover on arc.
there we go. And I think if you press control again, it resumes.
Presenter view. Window. Presenter view. Web content has.
Cool. So you can make it go, shut up, and stop. You can also set up a speech mute toggle, and you can, if you wish, use the caption panel, this thing here, which will display exactly what it would read. So if you want to temporarily use that instead, you can. To set up the toggle, you can go to VoiceOver utility, and under Commanders, you can set up a hotkey to use with the Option key for muting speech toggle. It's very useful. So, for example,
Keyboard focus.
I can
Speech muted.
Speech muted, but it's still on, and I can still move around the application and see what's going on. I'm going to turn
Speech
it off.
unmuted. Voiceover off.
Turn it off for now. So, back to the demo. So, right, there's some issues. As you can see, we couldn't initially interact with the keyboard alone. We had to either click in the window for tab to start working, or the VO and arrow keys somehow managed to get it to work. But the tab key at first didn't work. There were loads of titles missing where we didn't know what was what. We can kind of infer from the value and the dB, but it wasn't good enough. Unclear grouping. There seemed to be multiple copies of the same component. Mute for what? Or phantom for what? There's quite a few. And it's not clear. Oh yeah, there's a couple of minor points here. So those toggle buttons, you could see that it said on, and if you interacted with them, they would have said off. But it's best to report the most accurate role for that component. So it was just announcing as button. Toggle button would be a lot better because it signifies that it can be toggled. So we need to change that. Small point here, when you use drawers, it often says with a particular type of toggle button that you can use spacebar to interact with the component, not just enter. So some users might expect the spacebar to be able to work. Depends on your app, right? Like if you've got a DAW, spacebar might trigger the transport. But for our app, we could probably enable that. It's best to have multiple ways to do one thing. When we were tabbing, can't remember if I showed, but if you used tab, it would just go over the buttons. Quickly show. So
Voiceover off. 48V button.
if I go tab,
Off. M button. Off. S. Off. 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 Off.
it's just going over the buttons. And if I use the VO and arrow keys
Off. Off.
to sort of navigate around.
Vertical slider. Off. Off. Zip C. 0 dB. Vertical slider. Voiceover off.
It would go to the other components, but tab was just going through the buttons. We'd probably expect that the sliders would receive keyboard focus as well. And there was a bit of a strange focus order going on as well, so we'll get to that. So let's start fixing this. So fixing the initial keyboard interaction. It's a slightly counterintuitive fix. I'm actually in touch with the Juce team at the moment because we want to figure out whether this is this a bug or not. But in any case, the point that I'm trying to get across is that if you just try and use the keyboard to interact with your app, you will identify issues like this, which are potentially blocking for people who want to use your application. Or plugin, by the way, mainly focusing on desktop applications, but the concepts still apply here for plugins. So slightly counterintuitive fix, but if you're using a document window, I find that if you set once keyboard focus false, it actually allows the content component to get the keyboard focus instead. Otherwise, the window component will trap the keyboard focus. So I'd encourage playing around with that if you're using a document window and that behavior. Alternatively, I won't go into detail with this today, but you can grab the focus of the main content component in active window status changed, and that also fixes it. Maybe I will jump through to the next one as well, and then we will make those changes and assess it. So next one, okay, it's not quite fixed yet, but we're almost there. Adding titles, this is super easy. Juce component just has set title on its interface. You can just use this to give it a meaningful name. Text buttons will take the text that you give it, and that will use that as the title by default, but you can override that. So for example, our M and S buttons, we're just announcing as M and S, but we might as well expand that to mute and solo. So we're gonna set that explicitly. So let's do that now. So with the power of Git and the gods of CPM source cache, so I'm gonna set some titles and that thing with the initial keyboard focus as well. So let's get that building. So in my application, I have, it's kind of concise, slide-weary stuff. I could have moved this out to another class, but I didn't. This is the application window. I just call set once keyboard focus false. We'll see what that does. In the channel strip, I have a bunch of components that I'm adding and making visible in the constructor. When I set them up, I can just call set title. So we've got level, we've got gain. This is like a sort of mixing desk thing where you've got a gain slider as well as a fader. We've got pan, and then the mute and solo as well. We're setting as mute and solo. So let's see what we got now with VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on code. Debugging stuff.
Okay, so
Find it. Screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Window. Off. 48V button has keyboard focus.
Okay, so the 48V button has focus, and if I press tab,
Off. Mute button.
we can now immediately just keep tabbing around, which is great.
Off. Solo button.
Mute and solo, cool.
Off. 48V button. Off. Mute button.
Okay, so
off.
we still have
Solo button.
some more issues.
Off. 48V button.
But if I now use the VO and arrow keys.
Channel 3. Group.
Okay, actually, what have we got here? So channel 3, a group. A group affords going into it. So to do that, you do VO, shift, and down. Let's try doing that.
In channel 3, group content is empty.
Content is empty. So this is quite a common thing that I've seen when we were making stuff. Often you can end up with empty groups like this, which are confusing because there's nothing in them. Yet next to them, if I go VO and right,
0 dB. Game vertical slider.
there are a bunch of components, and there's
Channel
multiple
4, 0 dB. Channel off. Channel 4. 0 C.
components.
And vertical slider.
So there's a problem with the grouping still, but we'll get to that. However, our titles
0
are here,
dB.
so
C. And vertical slider.
that's great.
VoiceOver off.
Let's go back. Command F1. Brilliant. So, can't interact with the keyboard alone, fixed. Titles, fixed. Let's fix the grouping. So, components have the group role by default. So by default, they are kind of acting as a container component, which makes sense, right? Because a component can contain child components if you're using it to lay out your components on the screen. However, to change the focus behavior, you need to call set focus container type on the component. And there are two types. Oh, well, there are three. One is off. The other is focus container, and the other is keyword focus container. So to understand the difference between the two, it all kind of boils down to what happens when you press tab. And the difference between focus and keyboard focus. So keyboard focus is very much what happens when you press tab and it moves around. Focus is more independent and it's tied to the screen reader. So like when I was doing the VO plus arrow keys. Usually these are kept in sync, these are the same. But when you reach a container, the end of a container, the behavior can change. So with a keyboard focus container, and you're tabbing, and you get to the end of it, it will either stay there or it will go around to the start of that container. It will be trapped within that container. With a focus container, it will announce the grouping, like we saw with that channel strip. It will allow you to go in and out. And if you press tab while in it, it will just go to the next group. And it will tell you that it's leaving one group and entering another. Generally, rule of thumb, depending on the layout of your app, I rarely find we're using the keyword focus container. If you're doing kind of modal stuff where you've got a sort of dialogue on screen that you have to interact with before returning, you probably want to use the keyword focus container. But for most grouping, the focus container is what you want. Yeah, I kind of mentioned that earlier. So let's fix the grouping. Cool. So this is very simple. All we do is in our channel strip, we set the title of the channel strip in the group, which contains a bunch of channel strips. So this is where we're calling set title. In the channel strip group class. In our channel strip, in the constructor, we set focus container type to focus container. And did I rebuild that? I'm not sure. So let's have a look now.
Voice screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Window. Off. 48V button has keyboard focus.
Okay, so let's keep tabbing.
Off. Mute button. Off. Solo button. Leaving channel 1. Entering channel 2 group.
Ah,
48V
okay.
button.
So now it's indicating where we are in our application. And we can go in and out of groups. So if I do VO shift up.
Out of channel 2 group.
That comes up a level. And now if I go right and left.
Channel 3, channel 4, group, channel 3, channel 1.
We can go along the top level of our application and we can go into a channel as we want to.
Channel 4, group.
And 4, VO shift down.
In channel 4, group.
And we can go
6
in.
items, 0 dB, gain vertical slider.
So grouping is a lot better now. Okay, cool. Let's go back.
Voiceover off.
So, onto the buttons. So let's make them announced as toggle buttons so it's clear that they can be toggled. So to do that, we need to use an accessibility handler. So the problem that we've got is I decided to use the Juce text button because I just wanted a quick way to make a text button with a little border around it. The stock Juce text button always announces as just being a button. Probably some reasons for that. Maybe text buttons are meant for single fire actions. There is a Juce toggle button. That's kind of more for sliding toggle style things or checkboxes, kind of like preferences. But hey, we use the Juce text button. How can we make this accessible or improve the accessibility? Well, we need to make a custom accessibility handler. So to do that, in your Juce component, so say we've got a button that inherits from Juce text button, we just need to write a way to return an accessibility handler. So you can do that with create accessibility handler, like there, which you can override, and that returns a unique pointer to an accessibility handler. Then to construct one, you give it the component to wrap. So typically you'll do star this to sort of deref the current component. And then this is what we want. So the accessibility role, there's a bunch of different roles. There's button, toggle button, static text, label, group is a role. So you can give it what you want there. Actions and interfaces, we're not going to go into today, but that is generally how to interact with the component and how to get the current value out. You can define specific ways of doing that. So if we were to go ahead and write an accessibility handler for our button, we would end up duplicating the inbuilt Juce one, which is kind of 100 lines long. I can't fit 100 lines on a slide. So how can we not do that? So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You can access the Juce button accessibility handler. It's in the detail namespace, which is a little bit naughty, but it's using Juce implementation detail, and it could change, but it's a very specific class that's tied to basically exactly the same usage as yours. So if it changes, you probably want it to change because they're probably updating it to make it better. It also could be removed, but then we could just write one. It's fine. I've actually chatted with the team, and they reckon we could actually make it public because there's no reason why not to. But yeah. But anyway, for the purpose of slideware, what we can do is in create accessibility handler, we can just return one of these Juce ones, which in its constructor lets you set the role. So we can just say, oh, is our button toggleable? Yep, cool, it's a toggle button. So that's what I'm going to do. Cool, and then while we're on buttons, making the spacebar trigger buttons. So this can be a little, at first, you might look through Juce button and you might see add shortcut and be like, oh, that's what I want. But it doesn't do what you think. That will only work for the first button that you assign that shortcut to. It's kind of for adding unique shortcuts for your application, kind of like the command handler stuff, like if you're setting up a command X for cut or something like that. So don't use that. That's not what we want here. We want to be able to override the key pressed for that button. So when the component is focused, it will handle those key presses. So we just need to write our own key pressed. You can see that the default Juce one is similar to this. It just checks, is it enabled? No, get out of here. If it's the return key, we'll make it trigger the click. But we're also saying, or if it's the space key, then we can return true to consume the key press after triggering the click. So we're going to do that, nice and simple. So let's do that. So we added the titles, support toggle button role. That's what we're doing. Allow spacebars to trigger buttons. Cool. So let's build that up. Little cat. Okay, cool. That's building. I wanted to do the whole build and wait thing so I can take a drink. Okay, cool. So, voiceover.
Voiceover on code. Channel strip CTP.
Okay, Command tab.
Screen reader accessibility
Okay,
demo.
let's go.
Code. Screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Window. 48V. Off. Toggle button has keyboard focus.
Toggle button, cool. That means we can toggle it. So I'm going to press space.
48V toggle button.
Toggles. Enter.
Off. 48V toggle button.
Toggles. There's also a VO key for interacting with buttons, which is VO and the space bar.
48V toggle button.
That works as well, which is great. And then what was the other thing we... Oh yeah, so toggle button.
Mute. Solo. Off toggle button.
Mute and solo toggle buttons.
Leaving channel 1. Entering channel 2 group. 48V. Off. Toggle button.
And the phantom power button is toggle button as well. Awesome. Right, let's go. Let's go
Voiceover
back.
off.
Letting the sliders receive keyboard focus. Again, nice and simple. As you can see, these are all quite small little things that that's all you need to do to improve the accessibility. So simple that I didn't actually add a slide for it because it's literally just set once keyboard focus. So on our slider, we just call, when we set it up, we just call set once keyboard focus true, and that will sort it. No need to run that up for now. I'm going to carry on, and we'll check it in a bit. So, fixing the focus order. So, onto the fun part. So, by default, the Juce keyboard focus traverser goes top to bottom, and then left to right. So, it will start at the top, and then see if there's anything sort of left to right, and then it will kind of make its way down, like you're reading a book, basically. You might run into issues that make it kind of not make quite, just like this sentence, not make sense much, depending on how you're drawing the component within its bounds. I'll just quickly demo the problem, sorry. So, build it up. Come through M2. Here we go. Right.
Voiceover on code. Channel screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Window. 0 dB. Gain vertical slider has keyboard focus.
Okay, so it started on the gain, you noticed. And if I press tab,
48V.
it then goes to 48V. And now with my Western writing system bias, that doesn't quite make sense. I feel like it should start on the 48V.
C. And
we'll work out what's going on.
Button. 0 dB. Gain vertical slider.
We'd want it to go left to right, and then down, down, and then left to right, and then scan through the app like that, so that it matches the visual representation.
Voiceover off.
And it's quite important to maintain as much parity between the sort of keyboard focus and the visual representation, because you never know who's using your app. There might be two people. One might be visually impaired, one might be a sighted user. You want them to be able to communicate with each other about where things are on the screen and how to perform different actions. So let's sort that out. Worth pointing out, that is a very minor thing in our application, but this concept will apply to a lot sort of more complicated layouts. So keyboard focus traverser. So I'm going to show two examples. This first one, we've got two components, two rectangles side by side. The left-hand one is horizontal. The right-hand one is vertical. Since the default Juce keyboard focus traverser goes top-down, in this space, the right-hand one has a higher vertical position. You see? It's at the top. So since we don't feel like that's quite correct, we feel like because they exist on the same row, the left-hand one should go first, right? Second example, we've got the same graphics. However, the components are now square, and we're drawing within them. There's two different ways of doing it. I've seen multiple. We do things differently depending on the context. In this one, since the vertical or Y positions of the squares are the same, see they share the top row, the traversal will then look left to right. So it will pick the left one first. So there's something to consider when you're drawing things on the screen. For our application that we're developing, we've got this. So the gain slider has the rotary and then the label underneath it, which means it's kind of tall, whereas our 48V button is horizontal, it's on its side. We could change how we're drawing things, but we don't want to do that. We just want to fix it. So how do we do that? Well, there's a number of solutions. We can manually set the explicit focus order. I'll go through these things in a sec. We can make a completely custom Juce keyboard focus traverser. But that's probably overkill for a kind of static layout that we've got. It's the keyboard focus traverser stuff is great for like complicated dynamic stuff. But to do that, you kind of have to deal with component pointers and keep track of what the next one is, what the previous one is. We don't want to do that right now. So there is another option, which is a little trick that a colleague of mine invented, which is you can semi-automatically set the explicit focus order. So let's start with the manual one. So nice and simple. You just set the explicit focus order on the component. It starts from 1, not 0. if you've got a handful, like quite a few, that's going to get a bit taxing if you've got like 10, 20 components to call that, because if you're like me, you'll forget how to count, and 2 will appear twice, and 5 will become a different number. Yeah, yeah. But what if it was like this? What if we could use words instead of numbers? What we can do is we can make a little tool. I'll show you the implementation in a sec. We can say, hey, I want it to start with this component, then I want it to go here, and then I want it to go here. Sort it out. And we can call this whenever the order needs to change. So to make something like this, this is redacted view. There's a few constructors and stuff that you'll need to delete and whatnot. This utility is in the repository, in the utilities directory. Essentially, you want some sort of static method that's called starting with that will return this explicit focus order class. And what that allows you to do is then use a kind of builder style pattern to kind of build up the order. So you can call starting with, and then we'll set the explicit focus order, that manual method, with an internal counter that then increments every time you call then. So it's kind of neat. Yeah, we use it quite a lot for our software. So let's have a go. So again, nice and simple in our channel strip. We've got, after we set up the components, we just make, we just make an explicit focus order, and we say, yeah, I want it to start on the phantom power button, then it's to go to the gain, and then pan, level, mute, solo. You could probably get away with just calling it on the first 2 just to sort that bit out, because everything else seemed fine. But you might as well be explicit, because that is better than being implicit. So let's do that and see. Drink. Voiceover on.
Voiceover on code. Check.
Control to pause. Command tab.
Find iter. Screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Screen reader accessibility demo. Window. 48V. Off. Toggle button has keyboard focus.
Okay, so we've started on the phantom power button. That's great. And now if you go tab.
0 dB. Gain
Goes to the
vertical
gain.
slider. C. Pan vertical slider.
Goes to the pan.
0 dB. Level vertical slider.
Got our level that we can
Mute.
interact
Off toggle
with.
button.
Mute.
Solo. Off toggle button.
Solo. And then we go to the next one.
Leaving channel 1. Entering channel 2 group. 48V. Off. Toggle button.
Tells us where we are at all times. And we can go in and out.
Out of channel 2. Channel 1. Channel 2. Channel 3. Group.
And we can control whatever channel we want to.
Channel 2. Group. In channel 2. Group. 0 dB. Gain vertical slider.
Change the gain if we wanted to. We can go into the slider, which although it's not a group, it will start interacting with it.
In vertical slider.
And then we can use the hierarchies.
30 dB, 20 dB, 10 dB, 20, 30 dB,
Got a nice 70 dB range. There we go. Cool.
20 dB.
Excellent. So,
Voiceover off.
brace yourself. We did it. Just an excuse to use the carp streamer emoji. We've significantly improved the accessibility. There's probably some parts that still aren't perfect, but we're going to ship that, and we're going to see what people think, and we can improve. We can always improve it. But these are the sort of basics that we've discovered ourselves through simple techniques, simple code to improve our accessibility a long way. Yeah, that's great. So, some further reading, if you wish. Ed Davies, who used to work at Juce, did a great talk a couple of years ago on how they made Juce accessible. It's very interesting to see what goes on behind the scenes. I mentioned about other ways of doing GUI app development. We all know, we've all seen the talks that have been around. Web views are gaining popularity. I'd say perhaps consider it. The cross-platform accessibility is naturally better, just because of the way you mark up content. But I know it's a tricky decision to make. You might have a fully fledged Juce app. You're not just going to move to a web app. But I would, look into it if you're new to this or if you're starting something new. Also, just a quick shout out to Sodara's Melatonin Inspector. I won't go into it today, but this is a neat Juce module which you can easily add to your application, and it attaches to your window and it gives you a little representation of the hierarchy of your components, and it shows you some accessibility information as well. So it's similar to the Accessibility Inspector in some senses, but it's more Juce specific. It's very handy for seeing like the order of things. I won't go into this now. If you're interested in more Focusrite accessibility, Kane, a colleague of mine, did a great talk on how they made the Launchpad app accessible. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks everyone for listening. If there's any questions, I'll take them now.